Welcome, welcome. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us here and living in Mexico. As you know, we are a couple of weeks away from this very important elections that took place in Mexico. And I think one of the issues that we have at least not analyzed on the show, because we're so focused on the transition, um, and the appointments made by Mexico's future president, Claudia Sheinbaum, for example, and whether she will or will not be able to distance herself from some of the positions laid out by current President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, and whether she is, what are going to be her priorities and whether they're going to differ from the current administration. I mean, so we've been focusing a lot on the transition, but I think an issue that we need to be talking about is what happened to the opposition and what is the future of the opposition in Mexico, or is Mexico destined to once again be ruled by, to be a country ruled by one party? And that's a very interesting question, since, as you know, the Mexico was ruled by one party for almost 80 years by the PRI. Are we heading towards that model of governance? Well, it all depends on what happens with the opposition. That's why I really appreciate today's guest, Alejandro Aurrecoechea. He's been joining us throughout the years. It's really good to have you back, Alejandro. He's a very well-known and respected political analyst. Alejandro, welcome to the show. So let's just lay it out. What is the future of the opposition party, considering how diminished they are in terms of not only governorships, but also in the both legislative branch? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ana Maria. Nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. For sure, it's a grim future for the opposition. Undoubtedly, we have seen in the last few years really the strength of Lopez Obrador and Morena continue to consolidate itself and even permeate institutions such as the National Elections Institute, the Federal Electoral Court. It's clear that they lean more or less towards Morena, and that had an impact maybe in the last election, and it will continue to have an impact going forward. No, I see a very weakened PAN, but the National Action Party will continue to be the main opposition party. It was founded in 1939. It's the most institutionalized, and it will continue going forward, but it will return maybe for the next 6 to 12 years to this long march of trying to open up a system that is increasingly authoritarian. And the PRI maybe also continuing to be weakened towards the future, and maybe even entering into transaction with the majority coalition.
That's interesting. So you think at one point the PRI, at least those who are in the heads of the PRI, we're talking about, he's known as Alejandro Moreno, who is the current president of the PRI, and he's going to be a senator, and he's going to probably head the PRI senators in the next legislature. I mean, are we talking about him basically just saying, we will vote? Our senators will vote in favor of your constitutional reforms, for example?
Well, I think that the coalition that we had seen for the elections between the PRI and the PAN will cease to be as rigid, and the PRI may support some of the measures promoted by Morena. That being said, I don't think the PRI will support, for example, the major changes to the judicial branch that would that constitute an existential threat to democracy or to the Republican way of government, and that may occur in September. So I think that's something to watch going forward. If it can, Morena is 3 senators short of having this supermajority, and let's see if they are able to withstand this pressure. But I do see a weakened PRI and trying to win favor with Sheinbaum going forward.
I listened to people who voted against Claudia Sheinbaum and who are against Morena for different reasons. And what strikes me is that they accuse Morena and even the president of having, quote unquote, committed fraud and stole, quote unquote, the elections. But I mean, I just look at the numbers, and we have to ask ourselves, why did so many people go out and vote for her? for Claudia Sheinbaum, the Morena candidate, Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador's candidate. And it seems to me it's because the opposition really had nothing to offer. And this is not necessarily a criticism against Xochitl Gálvez, who was she was the candidate for the opposition. It just seems that the opposition in general has nothing to offer.
Well, I would differ slightly. I do think that Sheinbaum won. In the end, she won a mandate. She has a very large majority. She will be the next president, and it's legitimate that she be so. But I do think that there was no level playing field. I would even say that in Mexico, in the last elections, they weren't free and fair elections, no, according to international standards. I think the federal budget was used unequally to favor the ruling party, and also the electoral institutions didn't guarantee a level playing field. So I do have that caveat to note.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, when you look at what's happened to the PAN and to the PRI, and now the PRD, which was the party on the left side of the political spectrum, that was, in fact, Andrés Manuel López Obrador was president of that party. He ran on that party platform, and now it's on the verge of disappearing. I mean, there's going to no longer be a party that can be an option to on the left side that can be an option to Morena. And of course, you look at the PRI, and the PRI just carries this legacy of a perception that goes back to 70 years of an authoritarian regime, or being the party that was run by which was the one-party system. And then you have the PAN, which is a party that's traditionally has been on the right side of the political spectrum, and it just hasn't been able to at least create support even from the business community, which I think would have been more likely to support it. So I guess the question is, something had happened to parties of the opposition that people are not listening to them. And I think in part it has to do how these parties governed. And this takes me to one of your articles that you just published, which I thought was very interesting, very important, which you talk about Enrique Peña Nieto, the former president of Mexico. And in certain ways, it's an extraordinary article, which you basically state that he was the one who taught the opposition, or taught party leaders to give in to Morena. I mean, let's talk about this article that you wrote.
Yes, for me it was a very interesting topic, because I really admired Peña Nieto in a certain way. I know he was polemical, controversial, but I really bought into his structural reform agenda, and I think he managed to do great things regarding energy, education, things that are crucial for Mexico going forward, and that now have been obliterated. And in the end, looking at the historical record, it's obvious that he really entered into some kind of alliance with Lopez Obrador, and helped destroy his own legacy, because he I think weakened the PAN candidate in 2018. No, so I think we saw this same negotiations at the state level after him with other PRI governors that had a hands-down approach and didn't support their party, and I think that explains a lot. No, so I think Morena, going back to your initial comment, I think Lopez Obrador is very charismatic. He implemented important policies that people like a lot, like the direct transfers of money. That has made him very popular. But in the end, we have also to see that an authoritarian regime has started to reappear. If you saw the media, the media didn't replicate corruption scandals. And these governors illegitimately helped the Morena. And also, I think the opposition can renew itself, but it will have to go to the grassroots again, and also change leaderships, but also try to weaken these structural disadvantages.
Well, but I think it's also honesty in terms of are you part of a party or not, or are you allowing yourself to be used to destroy the opposition? And I think one person that we have not spoken about enough is the former candidate for the state of Mexico, which she was the PRI candidate. There was questions as to whether she should have been the candidate, but she ended up being a relatively good candidate. But she was beaten by Morena, and 2 weeks or a week before the election, she announced, so she lost, right? This was last year. And now a week before or 2 weeks before the election, she announced that she, as a former candidate of the PRI for the state of Mexico, which was a very important state, Peña Nieto's state, by the way, has announced that she would be supporting Claudia Sheinbaum, the opposition from Morena. I mean, and everybody was like, of course, she was basically set there to make sure that the Morena candidate would win. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's more of a problem. I mean, it's hard to fight for the opposition or to try to find a way that they're going to be a balance or create some kind of checks and balances for Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, when the people within these parties are basically there either because they're trying to protect their personal interests, perhaps not go to jail, or they're there because they are going to help Morena in some way or other by destroying their own parties. You know what I mean? And that's what happened with Enrique Peña Nieto.
Exactly, and I think Machiavelli taught us that there's pragmatism in politics and there's no ideals, maybe, but I think the Mexican case really took it to the extreme, and they really subverted the young democracy, and I don't think we can... I think the transition to democracy in Mexico has ended. We're returning to an authoritarian type of regime. I think there will continue to be elections and political parties will row against the current, but it's a completely new scenario.
New reality, yeah.
I think that's
an
important...
One last question, because we're literally running out of time. I mean, with that very pessimistic view and analysis, I mean, I think there will be, external pressures and even internal pressures to try to figure out mechanisms by which Mexico can have opposition parties again. What needs to happen?
Well, I think in the end, Claudia Sheinbaum has to deliver, no? If there's a big economic crisis and she doesn't manage the huge spending that's growing, and the security situation goes out of control, I think people will become disaffected again, and pressure and support for opposition parties will grow, and no authoritarian scheme can contain that in the long term. So for sure, she will have to deliver results going forward. And I think international pressure is important. I am surprised that the US and the Biden administration, that always speak about democracy promotion, are really being complacent with the future upcoming destruction of the Supreme Court. You saw a completely different policy in El Salvador, Guatemala. It's a double standard. Very surprising. I don't know what they're receiving in return, but surprising that the US would take such a position.
Yeah, and it will be talking a lot in the next couple of weeks about the future of the bilateral relationship. And in part, it's difficult to play it out, because we still have to figure out who's going to be the next president of the United States. And I do think there's going to be a difference depending on who wins the elections in the United States in November. So hopefully we'll have a chance to speak soon. Alejandro Aurrecoechea, I really appreciate you joining us. Please come and join us soon here on Living in Mexico.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to go to a commercial break, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Please